Hey. Oh, hey.
Hello,
Hello.
calling Chris Anderson, and you are back in London.
It does look that way. Yes, I am. Actually, believe it or not, I am in London, and it looks like you were in Chicago. So this is kind of unique.
Yeah, we are in our home studios,
Yeah.
and enjoying it. And welcome everybody to History Happy Hour, brought to you with the help and assistance of Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours, the people who get us out on the road all the time, offering a variety of history tours in the U.S., Pacific, and Europe. And you can check it out at StephenAmbroseTours.com. And so Chris, this week I do want to mention to people that we will be traveling back 2,500 years
Yeah.
to some epic battles in ancient Greece. And whether you're watching live on replay or listening on the HHH podcast, thank you so much,
Yeah.
podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I actually flipped those paragraphs around. I got
I,
I got a little confused there. And I wanted you to know that I went. Yeah, this has nothing to do with antiquities, but I went to see Barbie
is
yesterday.
that why the shirt matches? Did you wear the shirt
I
yesterday?
did wear this shirt. This was my. I was requested to wear this shirt by the person with whom I attended the film,
Mm,
and but
yeah.
it was yes, it definitely. I
It
will
was an
say
academic tour de force.
it leaves the patriarchy kind of face down on the beach,
Ah,
almost
okay.
literally, almost literally. So yeah, it was a fun summer film. So everybody who's watching, let us know you're here and what you're drinking. Well, it was Chris, and
I, just that segue from Barbie to
we're just moving around. We who it's History Happy Hour. Who knows where we're going or
that's
how we're going
true.
to get
That's
there?
true. That's true.
And we do what one place we always go is we want to thank everyone who supports us via
Absolutely.
Patreon, especially our top shelf patrons. And look, we have three more spaces there.
Ah,
I mean, it's
ah,
just you could become a top
creeping
shelf
up on
patron
you.
and
The
be
door, like
on
the door is closing. You gotta like just
be
jump
on
in
this
there.
list. Well, no,
Yeah.
it's not. We can always move that bottle over too.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good.
So,
Phew.
if you want to join us as a top shelf patron or patron at any level, you can do so at patreon.com/historyhappyhour. So I think we've been keeping our guest waiting long enough.
Yeah,
So
we
I think we should move forward with the show, Chris. So why don't you give me a cue for doing that?
all right. The bar is open.
The bar is open. It has been 2,500 years since the Athens, the birthplace of democracy, joined with the other Greek states to fight off the mighty Persian Empire. And so the question that might not come to your mind right away, but does come to ours, is how does this affect the world we live in today? And to explore that, we are joined by Stephen Kershaw, who's the author of the new book, The Epic Battles That Saved Democracy. And those three battles are Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis. Here's the book, by the way. Two.
Rick,
Yeah,
don't put your fingers over the title.
I get. Oh, right. Oh, thank you.
There you
Yeah, there
go.
you go. Woo. Okay, there's a book.
Much better.
It's two victories and one very famous Spartan defeat. And Steve has been a classics tutor for 30 years. He's also created Oxford University's online course on Greek mythology, the fall of Rome, and the Minoans and Mycenaeans. He lectures at the Victoria and Albert Museum and runs the European Studies Classical Tour for Rhodes College and the University of the South. Steve Kershaw, welcome, you
Thank you very
antiquities
much.
scholar, to History Happy Hour.
Yeah, well, hey.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you.
Okay, and you
Oh,
brought a
good.
cocktail. So what are you
Yes.
drinking?
I'm on the Negronis tonight.
Ah, very nice.
Oh,
So
That's very good.
do you have a cocktail, Mr. Anderson?
I have something that's fortified and looks an awful lot like water, but might not be.
But might be. And I am, as always, almost always drinking a nice beer here. Um,
Very good.
so Steve, just throw you a big softball at the beginning. What drew you to write about this time period, and what, in brief, is kind of the thrust of your book? I mean, I think we get it's three battles that saved democracy, but give us a little bit about what brought you to this and what you're trying to say.
yeah, I guess I mean I've been interested in this for in the classical world, the world of the ancient Greeks, for so long now, since I was a 10-year-old boy, when I was introduced to it really at my primary school by somebody who came into the school and read to us from the Iliad and the Odyssey. And for me, that was just the best thing ever. I thought this was fantastic. And this just inspired me. I must have gone home enthused about it to my parents. My grandpa bought me a copy of the Iliad and I read it with my torch under the bedclothes. And that kind of sent me off on my journeys into the classical world, really. So that took me to, studying Latin, Greek, that kind of thing at school, on to degrees at university, and then into a career in teaching, writing, traveling in the ancient world, and very much living that thing, really, that whole historical presence, which I've enjoyed very much. And I think the idea for the Three Epic Battles book was mainly, you said at the beginning, 2,500 years since those battles, and it was essentially written to come out to coincide with those final victories. In a sense, those things were being, amongst other things, commemorated in Greece very strongly, and so it seemed in a way an appropriate moment to write about something that's, not just 2,500 years old, but in a sense is a timeless piece of history that has resonances that come right through to the modern world, I think.
So Steve, you just said this, and it's something we refer to these battles as this clash between Greece and Persia. But in the book, you point out that events between the 12th and 8th centuries are difficult to trace, but what emerges towards the end of that era is a people who are divided into a large number of independent communities, which they call polis. There was no such thing as Greece in the sense of a 21st century nation state. So can you explain a bit, as we're setting out as kind of a baseline, what are we talking about? What is Greece, and what are these city states, and kind of?
Yeah, very much so, I think, and this is a really important aspect of all of this, is that sometimes this conflict is presented as a sort of monolithic clash between Greece and Persia, or between even the East and the West. But in fact, the Greek world as it exists when the Persians invade it is a very disunited world, in a sense. So it's which is partly governed by the geography of Greece. Greece is a very mountainous country, and which means that the communities that inhabit it are living very often in quite isolated communities. They have a great feeling of independence, and their allegiance really is local. So the people that we think of as Greeks have lots in common. They all speak Greek. They all worship the same gods. They all read Homer. They have an overarching cultural unity, if you like, but their lives are lived in small, independent, ferociously independent communities. So they think of themselves not as Greeks in essence, but as Athenians, Spartans, Corinthians, Thebans, Milesians, whatever. And there are literally hundreds of these Greek states. And in fact, it's only really towards the end of the Persian invasion that the Greeks start to conceive a sense of unity. They start to call themselves, they never call themselves Greeks in the ancient world. That's a Roman term for them. But they call themselves Hellenes. And really the first time that they call themselves Hellenes is towards the end of this conflict with the Persians. So, and prior to that, they're thinking very much in local terms. So it would, if England were Greece, then I would be thinking of myself as Oxford rather than English, if you like.
Right. So could you, just following on from that, would you say that this conflict then creates the idea of Greece?
In many ways, yes. In many ways, it does, because they need it's in this conflict, even threatened from the outside. They struggle desperately for sufficient unity to resist the invaders. And they're operating on this kind of my enemy's enemy is my friend principle. And there are deep rivalries between these Greek city-states. I mean, if you think of it like the rivalry between sports teams or something like that. So in English football, Manchester United hate Leeds United.
Right. So Persia would be Manchester City then.
Yeah, so Persia would be Manchester City.
Okay,
so
just
let's say City play United, and they will hate each other, and the people in Leeds who hate Manchester United will all cheer for Manchester City.
Right.
And I'm sure you have American football.
Let's move out of the soccer references as quickly as possible. So the bad guys in this story are the Persians, and they're the bad guys in part because all the accounts we have of the story, especially Herodotus, but basically all of the accounts come from the Greek side. The Persians either didn't write it down or it didn't survive. And so who are the Persians and what is the scope of their empire, and why are the Persian leaders Darius, who leads who's the head of the Persian Empire for the first invasion, and then after he passes away, his son Xerxes, why are they attacking Greece? And are they really bad guys, or is that just a little historical bias going on?
Yeah, we're always trying to untangle bias here. And as you rightly say, the vast amount of evidence that's coming to us, particularly written evidence, is from the Greek side, not from the Persian side. Many good reasons, perhaps, for it not becoming from the Persian side. A, they didn't win, although it could have been spun as a victory, I think, because the two of the initial sort of war aims of the Persian Empire were achieved during the invasion. It may not have been seen in Persia as being quite as important as it was in Greece. There's another aspect of it. This is a minor thing on the fringes of the empire. Maybe that's unlikely, but yeah, what we don't have is accounts coming from the Persian side in any way, shape, or form in the same kind of detail as they come from the Greek. And you asked about the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire is enormous, so it's well established. And yes, as you've beautifully put on the screen there, it covers pretty much everything that's on that map, apart from the top left-hand corner of it,
which is Greece,
which is the mainland Greece itself. So it covers everything from what is now the coast of modern Turkey in the west, right into India in the east. It also includes Egypt and Arabia, so it's bordered by essentially deserts at the south. It's bordered by major river on the east, and by seas at the west. And one of the things that's happened is that it's, in the course of its expansion, it's come to control cities that are culturally Greek cities, which are inhabiting this coast of Asia Minor, of say what is now Turkey. Some very well established, culturally very advanced Greek cities that have come under Persian control. And it's really that is the, if you like, the flashpoint for the conflict. We start to get conflicts between these Greek cities and their Persian overlords, and that then has involvement of cities within Greece itself. So that's essentially how the conflict the conflict comes in the large sense. That's how the conflict comes out.
So, Steve, one of the things that, obviously the things that you're kind of driving at in the book is that these battles save democracy. But at the beginning, it's kind of, it would be a stretch to call these Greek city-states democratic.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit? I mean, first of all, I know you go into some length about how Athens becomes a democracy, but where does this idea of democracy come from? If at the start the Greeks aren't even they don't even govern themselves that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, I think the key democratic state is Athens, and many of the other Greek states are not democratic. They haven't gone that way. Sparta isn't, for instance. But I do go and do it in the book a little bit, where the process of Athens becoming a democracy, it takes a long time. It just doesn't happen overnight. It's an evolutionary process that just involves the people themselves and their leaders collectively acquiring more and more powers within the state. So it's there are various stages, important stages along the way. The first time they get a written code of laws is important. They abolish internal slavery, for instance. So Athenians are no longer kept as slaves at Athens. And ultimately, there's a character called Cleisthenes who comes onto the scene and pushes through a series of political reforms that are designed explicitly to give power to the people, which is what the Greeks call democracy. But democracy to them is very different to what it is from us. So it means the rule, the krasi is the kratia, the power of the demos, who are the people. But the people, the demos, are adult, male, native, and free. So there are a significant minority, in fact, within the state. So people without political power are children, women, foreigners, slaves in Athens. And Athens is unusual within the Greek world. Most of the other states are, in fact, ruled by aristocrats, or sometimes by what's known as tyrants, who are not necessarily tyrannical. It's just the word the Greeks use, but they are sole rulers of their states who've usually taken power by force in some kind of way. So Athens is unusual, but if you like, they have developed this democratic system, which is remarkable and unique in a sense.
And it only happens. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, which I often am, but it only happens a few years before before the Persian invasion, and by a few I mean like less than 10 years. I mean, this is a fresh new thing that they're trying there.
So you're absolutely right. This new system is only kind of like a generation old when they come in. So it was it's roughly 18 years probably between the official, Athens in 508 thereabouts, 507 BCE, when this system is set up, and then 590 the Persians are fighting the Athenians at Marathon, and that is at stake, I think, because if the Athenians lose that battle, Marathon, then their government system will be changed. They have the Persians traveling with them have an Athenian ex-tyrant who's been expelled about the same time as they were creating their democracy. And if the Persians win, then he comes back to Athens and Athens stops being a democracy, I think. So there's, all right, so democracy, it's a kind of democracy, the genie is out of the bottle. Somebody else might install it somewhere else. But as far as the Athenians are concerned, this new system that they've got is hanging by a thread.
So it's like a plant. It's like a young plant coming out of the earth, and this is where it might get ripped up, and then we might never see another one.
That's well put.
All right, I'm done. I'm out of here. That's it for me.
But you say too that, or you kind of allude to the fact that this is sort of one of the things, the great strengths of the Greeks, or the Athenians in particular. You have Herodotus is saying the Athenians went from strength to strength. It's obvious that freedom of speech is an excellent thing. Here is the proof. When they were under tyrannical rule, they were no better in the military sphere than any of their neighbors. But once they had freed themselves from tyrants, they became far and away the best. So first of all, is democracy sort of the secret to their success? And are these Athenians aware that this is something special? Do they say, hey, this is really...
I think they are. I think they are because Herodotus is getting his information from there. So he's talking to Athenians and he's looking at it from the outside. So I think so, and I think this new system where everybody has a stake in it. This is the important part of it. I think is that everybody is involved. It's everybody has skin in the game. If nobody participates, and it's super participatory, and if nobody participates, it will fall apart. So everybody has to do their bit. They have to, serve in their government bodies. They have to go. They have to vote. They have to go to the law courts. They have to run this system, and it's completely hands-on. It's done in person. It's done face to face, and it's also, I think, interestingly done at sort of macro and micro level as well. So just like Greece is a number of independent city-states, or polis, then Athens is the state of Athens and individual little things that are called demes, which are like little villages. And they operate very closely. Everybody knows everybody else. They all have their own little constitutions that are like the big Athenian one. So everybody is, if you like, playing the democratic game all the time. So they have a huge vested interest in it. And I think it's notable that Herodotus says that in, as far as he's concerned, I think that democracy is their key. What he can look to is a state that was unremarkable until it became democratic, and then it becomes democratic and it becomes remarkable. And he kind of makes that equation. That might not be logical, but that's how he sees it.
So the first of the three battles that are in the title of your book, so probably worth focusing on, is the Battle of Marathon in, I think it's 480 BC.
490
BC. And a huge Persian army has landed there. They are very famously 26 miles from Athens. And the Athenians have to decide whether to risk battle or not. So give us a sense of this moment. What are the size of the forces? What happens here? We do have a map. What happens here that makes this something to remember?
Yeah, so I mean the Persians come, and this map is, as you say, is located almost exactly 26 miles away from Athens, and the Persians have arrived with a fleet and a huge army. It's to be honest, to try to put numbers on these things is very difficult, but it's an army that's in probably the tens of thousands, and they're coming in on conventionally 600 ships, and which
is always the number, right? Apparently.
It's always the number, yes.
Persians always have 600 ships.
They always do, or multiples thereof. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So that the Athenians know that they're coming. And the Persians choose to land here because this is very much the territory of this guy Hippias, who they're probably going to install in Athens. He's got his own sort of partisans there, and if so the Persians land here thinking this is a really good place to fight because it's a flat area of land, and their prime military assets are their cavalry and their archers. Really, they don't really want to fight face to face unless they have to. In fact, they don't want to fight at all unless they have to. One of the reasons they bring so huge numbers of troops really is just to menace people into submission. They'd much rather not fight at all. But so they encamp at Marathon. The Athenians then have a decision to make. Do we go and confront the Persians at Marathon? And the Persians think, well, that's cool because we'll win if you do. Or do we stay in Athens and perhaps decide to resist a siege or an assault that way? The Persians, I think, are thinking, well, that's cool if you do that as well, because we've got friends of Hippias and so on. They're likely to open the gates of the city and we'll win that way as well. So for the Persians, they think it's win-win. The Athenians then have this decision to make. Do we stay in the city or do we come out and fight? And it's credited to a guy called Miltiades, or Miltiades, if you prefer, who persuades them to go to Marathon to confront the Persians there. And Marathon has it has its plus points for the Persians, very definitely, but it has its plus points for the Greeks as well, because the plain is relatively narrow and it's surrounded by mountains on pretty much all sides, and you're now looking at the mountain on which the Greek forces probably deployed initially. So the Greeks are sitting on that mountain looking out. The Persians are out on the left, and the sea, you can just see the sea beyond. It's very close. It's like half a mile away, and so the Greeks can station themselves there, looking at the Persian forces, blocking the ways to Athens, which you've got to go through mountain passes, which are narrow. So they're here, and they can stop the Persians getting to Athens. So that's and as long as the Persians don't, then they're happy with that. They don't need to fight right at that particular moment, if you like.
Okay. So go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead, Rick.
No, I was just going to say. So they are there, and apparently the Persians, everybody sort of sits in position. We're going to let the other guy attack.
Yeah.
And then the Persians decide that well, we've had enough. We're going to wipe these guys out, or they're actually going to get back on their boats, some of them, and try to sail down to Athens. They're going to try to do something else, and that's the moment the Athenians attack.
Yeah, it's a very likely scenario, I think, is that in the sources there's much is made of the fact that the Persian cavalry were not there at the battle. They're never mentioned in the fighting. So the Greeks, the mountain that we looked at is Mount Agrialiki. It's the one bottom left on that map. So the Greeks are sitting there before they attack. And somehow there comes an opportunity to, they keep deploying and facing each other, but this time the Greeks kind of go all in and all at once. And they do it at a moment that appears to be the one where the Persian cavalry is not on the scene. So they negate that threat. And from that moment, they've simply got to get to hand combat with the Persians as fast as they possibly can.
And so tell us, Steve, a little bit more about these armies. I mean, I know it's a vast topic, but how are they structured? Are they basically similar forces? Do they fight differently, or?
Yeah, they fight very differently, Chris. The Persians, their sort of modus operandi really is that they only want to go into hand-to-hand combat when the enemy is in a disordered state and is not really fit to fight in that sense. So they're going to use archers and cavalry not to engage in hand-to-hand combat, but to ride up, throw javelins, to fire bows, and just bombard the enemy with missiles from a mobile force. And their archer forces, and who come from a variety of different nations and ethnic groups within the Persian Empire. There are Indian arrows that have been found on the battlefield at Marathon, for instance. But they are just simply going to want to shower the Greeks with volley after volley after volley of arrows until their forces disintegrate, and then they will charge themselves. What the Greeks are fighting is they're fighting in a hoplite phalanx of heavily armed soldiers with helmets, breastplates, greaves, big round shields, and thrusting spears. And they will, for the most part, fight 8 ranks deep. They have to thin themselves out in the middle at Marathon to make their line long enough to match the Persian forces, which plays to their advantage. So that they need to get to combat in the best order they possibly can as quickly as possible. And they have to cover roughly a mile. And the last kind of 200 yards of that is going to be under Persian arrow fire. And they do it so quickly that they manage to engage with essentially minimal casualties. And what happens in the battle fundamentally is that the weakened Greek center gives way, but the wings of the army prevail, and they simply envelop the Persians in a killing field in the end, and then pursue the stragglers to the ships.
It's funny because 1,500 years or 2,000 years later, at the Battle of Agincourt, Henry V and the British forces win because of their archers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, the archers and the French want to come to hand combat, and the archers, basically take them out before they can.
Yeah.
And here it's the opposite. I find myself kind of confused by this battle, and the same question may come up with the Battle of Salamis. The Greeks are presumably outnumbered. The Persians seem to have with the bows and arrows better technology. Why did the Greeks win?
Good. I think so. I mean, I think the Persian bow is not the English longbow. I think that's something. It doesn't have the same power and range, I think. But I think it's partly I think the Persians are taken by surprise here. It's the Herodotus describes it is that the Persians think that what the Greeks do is, in their words, lethal insanity. They're not expecting this to happen, for the Greeks to attack without cavalry support, without light armed infantry support. I mean, there may have been some of that there, but it's not mentioned in the fighting. And so they, and as I say, it's I think it's the speed of the Greek onslaught and the unexpectedness of it that is what wins the day for them. I think is that and if they can get to hand combat, then again, it's a description that Herodotus makes. It's kind of exaggerated, but it's like fully armed men fighting naked men. That's how he describes it. It's so if they can, the Greeks have a special name for it when their phalanx engages, when this 8-man deep formation, which is when it's powering forward in good order, it's terrifying actually. When they finally engage, it becomes a bit like the line of scrimmage in an American football game or a hyper-violent rugby scrum. It's that everybody pushes as well, and they have a special word for it. It says othismos, which is the pushing, the shoving. So they just lean in and push and shove, and once they get the upper hand, then once the battle is turned, that's really the end of it for the defeated side. When the battle turns, everything then happens very, very quickly.
And sorry, I'm so excited. I'm interrupting. But there's one other part of this battle that's important to mention, which is that we've talked about Athens quite a bit, but that other Greek city-state among the hundreds, but the one that's most military, most gung-ho fighters, they're a little busy. They this is not a good time for them. So they're not. Sparta is not at this battle. They somehow managed to avoid it.
Yeah, Sparta isn't there, and Sparta, is acknowledged as being the finest exponents of this kind of warfare on the Greek side within the Greek world. And the Athenians seek help. They send someone to run all the way to Sparta and run all the way back with the reply. And the Spartans say, well, yeah, guys, we'd like to help, and we're very happy to help, but we're actually having a religious festival at the moment, and
a little busy.
Basically Apollo is more important than you. Once the full moon is gone and the festival's over, then we're on our way. And when the battle is fought, the full moon has gone and the Spartans are on their way, which may have influenced the Persian aspects of this or may not. But the Spartans, eventually show up, but they arrive late.
So what are some of the fallout from this battle? Because it seems pretty conclusive. Yet we have 2 more battles to go.
Absolutely.
How does this fall?
Good question. I think the Persian Empire. First of all, the fallout for Athens is it becomes incredibly self-confident, and its status becomes greatly elevated within the Greek world, I think. So they feel that they've, if you like, saved their democracy at this particular point. The Persians, I mean, they're not going to take this defeat lying down. They're coming back. There's they had 2 war aims at this point, I think. Possibly a third, which may have been the conquest of Greece, but they wanted to punish the state of Eretria, which was on the island of Euboea, just across from where Marathon is, for being involved in a rebellion against Persia that was that happened a few years before, and they wanted to punish Athens for also being involved in that rebellion, in which forces from Athens and Eretria had burned the Persian region capital of Sardis and incinerated by accident, but they had incinerated a major temple. So the initial war aims of the Persians was to conquer Eretria, which they did, and they took hostages back and slaves back from Eretria to the middle of what's now Iran, and to conquer Athens. So their mission was 50% concluded. So we have basically the Persians have unfinished business, and what happens is and King Darius is definitely up for coming back and starts to prepare for it, but then he dies, and then his son Xerxes takes over, and he needs to deal with a whole load of problems before he can sort of put this punishing Athens thing back on his agenda, if you like. Does that kind of explain the?
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw this up again here. So the second battle.
Yeah.
That you talk about is the Battle of Thermopylae. I don't know if I'm saying any of these things correctly.
No, that's good.
And so it's 10 years after the first battle, and this time Xerxes, the son of, say it's not Darius, it's
Darius. Xerxes.
Yeah. No, the father's name is Darius.
Darius, or Darius, okay. Darius, whichever you like.
Yeah. So well, I'm just trying to pronounce correctly. So instead of coming across in a fleet, they march.
Yeah.
And they do this epic march around the Aegean Sea. And they come down and eventually get to. They manage at one point. We'll get to that. But they get down to this place Thermopylae, and this is where, very, very famously, been told in movies and books and such, 300 Spartans, along with perhaps a few thousand other people who did not have the same PR agencies, so they didn't get into the press release, hold off a huge Persian army before ultimately going down fighting. Now, this battle has been celebrated for 2,500 years, but it is a defeat. So what is it that makes it worth all the ink that it's gotten?
I think it's, in essence, it's a story of heroism and sacrifice, I think, in many ways. And it's a crucial element in the whole scenario of the wars, because I think fundamentally it buys time, and time is one of the most important things in this conflict. I think there's a number of things that are crucial. There's the fighting forces on both sides and their leaderships. There's their equipment, but we're also talking a war of logistics in a way. And we're told again and again and again about, particularly when Xerxes comes, about the enormous size of the forces that he brings with him and he deploys. It's in the millions. Here is a fine Persian warrior who's he's in the British Museum these days, and but they have these sort of these elite Persian troops with spears and bows and beautifully decorated Persian warriors. So he has this vast army, and the things that the Greeks can use to oppose him are themselves and their equipment and their hoplite way of fighting, their unity, if they can generate that, but also I think their landscape and the weather as well, and the weather on land and at sea, and they know the localities. So and with the force that the Persians have, they famously are drinking rivers dry. When so many of them, they just drink rivers dry. But if you can stop, if that force loses impetus and you can stop it, then you can only drink that river dry once, kind of thing, and you still have to feed all those people and look after them and what have you. So that the longer that the Greeks can fend the Persians off, the more likely their chances of winning the overall war are, and very much that's what they're seeking to do at Thermopylae. I think that they're trying to hold this up, and it becomes, I think, such a famous battle because it's so brilliantly described by Herodotus and other ancient accounts, and it's brilliantly memorialized by some great Greek poets, the likes of Simonides, in very memorable lines. But yes, I say it becomes this archetypal tale of the resistance of a few in the face of overwhelming odds from many, many, many. That ultimately, despite being a defeat, that self-sacrifice ultimately wins a war. I think that's what it's really about in the way it's received now.
But Steve, just to burst a few bubbles and maybe give everybody their due, could you mention some of the other Greeks that we should know about that were at Thermopylae?
Yeah, there are Plataeans and Thebans and Phocians. There are people from the Peloponnese and there's people from mainland Greece. So there are, and probably several thousand of these people. The accounts, will maybe number the Greek defenders in the first place in maybe 7,000 defenders. So, although as I say, it's the 300 Spartans who get the PR in the end, and not only that actually, but what they're trying to do is to, as I say, is to use the geography of Greece in order to their benefit. And really, the way that Xerxes' forces are coming into Greece from the north, they have to go through a very, very narrow pass between the sea and some steep and high mountains on one side, and the Greeks are quite simply trying to block this passageway and with their land forces, and just to keep them at bay for as long as they can. At the same time, they've also tried to do, and the pass itself runs east-west. It looks like the road that's on the map there, and there are mountains to the south and sea to the north, and where the Phocian wall is marked, and these gates, the west gate, the middle gate, the east gate, these are very narrow passages that are only really wide enough for a cart track between the sea and the land. So the Greeks are trying to block that, and they're going to take up their position at the middle gate, pretty much by the Phocian wall. That's where they're going to try and do their fighting, with a camp off near where Alpeni is, with the Persians camped at the western end there.
I mean, we don't want to give everything away, but that 300 Spartans and other people, they don't survive this battle. The Persians win, and people can read that the Spartans very famously are asked to surrender and give up their weapons and say, "Come and take them," in their laconic Spartan style. Athens gets sacked after this, right? That's after this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And burned, badly damaged. But the Athenians have run off, and not run off, but they have reformed. And the third battle that you talk about is the Battle of Salamis. And the interesting thing about this is that Athens is not really a naval power up to this point. But in the years before this, in that 10-year interwar period, as it sees Persia preparing to return for another tilt, it decides to become one. Yeah. And they've been doing some silver mining, they've got some money, and in a few years they build like 100 or 200 ships, triremes, that are eventually able to provide the backbone of the Greek naval force that wins at the Battle of Salamis. Yeah. And I got to tell you, Steve, when I read the book, it seems like some sort of miracle. It's like they were lucky enough to think about, well, let's just spend all our money instead of giving it to each other. Let's just build all these ships, and they built the ships, and then they managed to defeat the the Persians at Salamis, it seems almost like, I started to sympathize with the people who said Herodotus must be making stuff up, because it seemed like it was almost made up.
Yeah, it's an astonishing thing. I mean, certainly as the historical sources present this to us anyway, is that they in the interwar period after Marathon, before the next invasion, they find a particularly rich vein of silver in their state-owned mining district, and in normal circumstances they really would, they'd just divvy it up and everybody'd get a nice bonus and everyone gets a bit of cash. But they have a leader, Themistocles, who is, his vision really is to create Athens as a naval state and as a trading state in a way that it hasn't. And he manages to persuade the Athenian assembly that it would be a good idea not to give out this money and everybody take a pocket full of cash, but to build, a huge fleet of state-of-the-art warships. And actually the way he spins it is, this is not to fight Persia, this is to fight Aegina, which is a Greek island that you can see from Athens. And boy, do we hate those guys. We'd really like a fleet to fight those guys. So that's kind of, I guess that's how he gets the idea through. And the Athenians do. They go ahead and they build this fleet and they learn how to use it as well. It is astonishing.
So, Steve, I'm going to bring in some questions here, Rick. So if I
go ahead.
So Frank Cook has asked, is it possible to identify a common factor in the approach of the Greek military leaders that ultimately led to the victory that saved democracy?
That's a nice question, Frank. I think it's there is, in a sense, I mean, and yet there isn't, in a sense. The thing that they have to achieve, a common factor in the approach, that's the hardest thing that they're trying to achieve. When Themistocles is trying to get the Athenians to fight at Salamis, he constantly has to battle amongst his own people to make them do that, because different people want to fight in different places for different reasons. So gaining unity of approach is really, really difficult. And the guy who was able to do that in the Xerxes invasion above all the others, I think, is Themistocles. And I think the other thing, I think, one of the things in the narrative that always strikes me is that the Persians, particularly Xerxes, are always being given good advice and they never take it. So they and whenever someone gives the Persians a good advice and they don't take it, things go horribly wrong.
You wonder how their empires got so big.
But isn't this a little bit of the Greek bias in the history telling of this?
Could well be.
They didn't take the advice again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's there's a lovely bit where actually the Xerxes is accompanied by a Spartan king in exile, Demaratus. And Xerxes keeps asking him, he says, who are these people? Do they always fight like this? And, what are they doing now? And he says, they might be chaotic and disunified, but there's something they always obey, and that's the law. And I'm going to tell you that whatever you think, however many of you, however badly outnumbered, they will fight. It's freedom or death for them. I really like the way that he talks about that. And there's another Persian who asks some Greeks, what are the Greeks doing at the moment? And he says, they're celebrating the Olympic Games. And he says, and what's the prize? And he says, well, it's just a wreath of wild olive. And it's just like, whoa, these people are serious. They compete for that, and not for, these people are so unlike us that we don't get them. So I think I've gone off from Frank's question now, but I think there's, these misunderstandings on the Persian side as we're presented with them, seem to be quite part of the process, I think.
So a question from another viewer, Doug McCord, says, what was the lifespan of an ancient Greek? It is 10 years between the battles. Would it be a new army entirely? And I guess the flip side of that is, or do we know of people who were there both times?
Good question. Yeah, life expectancy is a difficult one, but if you live to your mid-40s, you've probably done all right. You become officially an old man geron in most Greek societies at the age of 60. If you live that far, and that's venerable and old. But yeah, there are.
So we are, Chris. We are. I mean, I am venerable.
You're venerable. I'm
You're
approaching
not quite
venerable.
there yet.
No.
I'm so sorry.
I'm venerable as well. Actually, the Greek word for it is geron. It gives us our word geriatric.
That's just not quite as nice as venerable, though.
But anyway, I think so there would be people who fought in both without question, and perhaps Aeschylus, the great tragic playwright, he fought at Marathon, and he and it says so. He wrote his own epitaph, and that was the thing he was most proud of, not his plays, but the fact that he fought at Marathon. And he also wrote a play called The Persians, which is a dramatization of the Battle of Marathon. So there's hard to tell. We don't know for sure whether he fought in the latter battle, but he was certainly alive at the time of both battles, and many other Athenian fighters would have been as well.
So, Steve, given obviously the impact of these battles on Western history, I guess you would say, how is this battle viewed in the East? How is it viewed in
Iran.
Persia? How is it viewed now in Iran? Iraq?
It's in many ways it's viewed as a footnote. Right. It's it's the Achaemenid Persian Empire is a vast and mighty and long-lived thing. These defeats in Greece don't bring an end to the Persian Empire, for instance. Xerxes continues ruling, and the Achaemenids will rule until Alexander the Great finally rolls them over in the end. So it doesn't bring down the Persian Empire. So it's often seen, I think, as a sort of like a bit of a fringe footnote on the on the edge of the Persian Empire, I think. And I think that this interests me, I think, because Xerxes and Darius could have spun this as a victory, because what did Darius? His forces destroyed Eretria. Xerxes burnt Athens. That was mission accomplished, essentially. Could have left at that point had he wished to. So, but he didn't, and he could have put up inscriptions like there are in various places in the Persian Empire, trumpeting his victories. I, Xerxes, King of Kings, Lord of many lands, Lord of the earth far and wide, burnt Athens in revenge for the atrocities committed against my father. We could have had that kind of information, but we don't, and I think that's interesting. So whether they're not seeking to draw attention to that, or whether it is indeed seen as a minor skirmish on the fringe, is it's hard to tell, but always worth thinking about. I think Robert Graves' fantastic poem, The Persian Version, is a wonderful thing to check out. It's transcribed in the book where he sees it from a sort of Persian propaganda viewpoint, and it was just a little skirmish. It went fairly well, and that was that.
So as we approach the end of our hour, what is the lessons that we should take from this? I mean, do we, if we are voting in elections today, and let's not get into elections today, but if we're voting in elections today, are we thanking Themistocles and the other Hellenic peoples who fought against the Persians? Are there other lessons that you draw from this? You have visited all of these areas. You have walked the battlefields at Thermopylae and Marathon, and you've spent a lot of time thinking about this. So, what lessons do you draw from it?
That's really interesting. I think we do owe the Greeks a lot in our democratic system. They invented it, and at this early stage in its development, they fought for it and they maintained it. And each time they won, they cemented it even more securely in many ways. So, we owe, I think, a lot of our political system to that. And I think one of the overarching themes that comes through the whole tale of the Persian invasion is, and it's something that Xerxes doesn't get, I think, and I think that the Greeks do, and is that to invade a free people who are prepared to fight for that freedom and everything that it brings on their own territory is actually a very dangerous, foolhardy thing to do. I think there's much of that. It's the perils of invading free people who have deep-rooted things to fight for is one of the things that comes out of the narrative. The Athenians thought that they were autochthonous, that they were actually literally born originally from the land that they inhabited. They'd always lived there, and their earliest people were actually born from that land. They'd never been anywhere else. So that feeling that this is our land since eternity is deeply embedded, and we have these principles of freedom of under the law, freedom of speech, and equality under the law, equality of speech, equality of power that make up democracy. That is something that they were not prepared to relinquish, I think, even against massively overwhelming odds.
So, Steve, that was a rousing endorsement of classics departments everywhere. And
I took classes from the classics department at Dartmouth. It was one of my classics professors who, based on my experience in his class, that he thought that graduation would see me trying to finish up my last paper, moments before the graduation, and hand it in late and get the grade done very late, and just pass the note to the president that yes, he's graduated, and give him his diploma. But listen, Steve Kershaw, thank you so much for joining us today. Fantastic. And just want to remind people that your book is right here, and it is, I can't read it because it's mirror image, but it's 3 epic battles that saved democracy. And we appreciate your taking part in History Happy Hour and talking to us about it today. Thank you so much. And we didn't even get into the sex, because there's sex in the book too. So
there's so much, the sex and the violence. But
that was my next question, was about sex, and we just didn't even get there. So you have to buy the book to find out about the sex.
Sex, violence, plastics, it's all there.
It's all happening.
Absolutely.
Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Big pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
If I had him as my classics professor, this could have all gone.
I know you would be leading tours on ships in. You'd be a competitor now.
I lead tours on buses and stay in Novotels. He leads tours and he's on a cruise ship.
And we go to I know. It's wow. We lead such hard lives.
I didn't say that. I'm just saying he leads. Never mind. All right. Moving on.
We have to drink French wine. We have to.
Moving on.
All right, fine. Well, next week we have an encore episode. Lynn Olson talks about her book, Empress of the Nile, the daredevil archaeologist who saved Egypt's ancient temples from destruction. And it's a story about a woman who really was kind of like a real-life Indiana Jones. She outwitted the Gestapo in World War II and went on to lead an extraordinary effort to save ancient Egyptian temples from the floodwaters of the Aswan Dam. And we love Lynn Olson on this show. Yeah. So if you haven't seen that show, or if you came in halfway through or whatever, you should check that one out, because it's definitely worthwhile to be a part of that. Don't you agree?
I do agree.
Yeah, I hope you agree. Yeah.
I saw that the New York Times was doing another review of her book, or a review of her book. And I said, wow, we beat them to it.
She makes it happen. She's had quite an amazing career.
Yes.
So maybe we'll get her on a 3rd time at some point.
Well,
we still haven't had anybody on 5 times.
We got to bring Joe is hanging in the wings.
We got to bring Joe back so we can get him a hat. And
we want to finish up the story of the 29th too.
Maybe I can get him a History Happy Hour hat and a Ghost Army hat.
Ooh,
because I have them both. Maybe that would.
That was like 6th show, because we have 2 more of his books to do.
Oh, all right, fine, okay. Listen, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today for our serious conversation and our our total bullshit that we also put out there. And please subscribe to us on YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow on Facebook. Shout at us on Twitter. Listen to our podcast. You can back us on patreon.com and browse our website and look at all our old episodes at historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. And just real quick, Michael, we stream every week on Sundays. Same time,
Same
channel.
bat time.
Same bat channel. Thanks, everybody. Be safe.
Oh, I'm pushing. Okay. How many weeks have I done this?